welcome back to my channel. I hope that you're doing well. Welcome to another video and welcome back to another recommendations video. I don't do a lot of recommendations videos, and that's just because for some reason I have it stuck in my head that I have not read enough books in order to give you some sound recommendations. However, after looking into it, I have read almost 400 books in the last 2 years, and I feel like that's grounds for like recommendation status. But today I'm actually going to be recommending my favorite audiobooks of 2021. Now, I did this video last year, so this is a video that I'm resurrecting from 2020, and I just figured since I have listened to a ton of audiobooks, I feel like I'm a good person to maybe recommend some audiobooks though, for those of you that are seasoned audiobook listeners and need some extra recommendations, or for those of you that have really been wanting to try out audiobooks but have been scared, don't know where to start, don't know what is a good narrator. So I feel like maybe this could be a good option for you if you are looking for some audiobook recommendations and you just need that extra little push. I have listened to over 200 audiobooks in the last 2 years, which is absolutely mind-blowing to think about, but I am a huge audiobook listener. I feel like for me personally, audiobooks really enhance my experience at reading a book and really help me to kind of step back from focusing on the words on the page and just really submerging myself in the actual story and what the author is trying to tell me. I personally like to read physical books alongside an audiobook. Like I said, it just makes it that much easier for me to grasp a story. But everyone is different, everyone likes their own thing, so if audiobooks aren't your thing, I totally get it. But if you are looking for some recommendations, I'm hoping this video will help you today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. The two audiobooks that I'm going to start with today are actually two that I do not own, so I wanted to get these out of the way first so I don't forget about them. But the first one is a memoir, and I feel like as a rule of thumb, you should always listen to the audiobook of a memoir. It just, the person narrating their life to you is just way better, in my personal opinion, than reading the words on a page, especially if the narrator is the author themselves. It just makes the book experience just a million times better, again, in my personal experience. But the first one that I'm going to recommend is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. This is a memoir about George M. Johnson's life growing up as a Black queer individual in today's society, and really their experience moving through the world and becoming okay with who they are and learning how to be out and proud in front of their family and friends. And I just really enjoyed the reading experience of this. George M. Johnson brought their own, love and feelings and humor and heart to the story because it is their story, and they really put a lot of time and effort into creating not only the physical book but also this audiobook, and it was just very, very well done. I highly recommend this one if you haven't already read this book. It is a fantastic LGBTQI+ book, but it's also just a fantastic memoir in total. There's a lot of awesome lessons to be learned in this book from George M. Johnson and their life, and I highly recommend this one for sure. The next one that we're going to talk about is a very, very, very short audiobook, and I mean short. It's 7 minutes long, and that is the audiobook for the Hillsby Climb. I don't remember the author of this one, but this was the poem that was recited at the inauguration for this year, and it got turned into a book and then into an audiobook as well. It's not the actual recording from the inauguration. I believe the author then went and re-recorded it in a studio because it doesn't sound like it was filmed outside. Anyway, besides the point. It's a fantastic little audiobook that I feel like if you have the chance to experience it, those 7 minutes of this audiobook, you should definitely do it. This is a poem about America as a whole, our generation, and what she's hoping this new phase of presidency and this new phase of leadership will help bring into the world. Regardless of your political standpoint on that, I'm not going to share my own, but I think that the poem itself was beautiful and extremely well done and had so much power and heart to it, and I definitely recommend listening to it if you get the chance. Alright, now I'm going to jump into the physical books that I own that I also listen to audiobooks alongside these ones. These are in no particular order. I don't have a particular favorite here, but I just figured I would share with you the ones that I've really enjoyed from this year. The first one being a more recent read, and that is Skyward. Why is it that every time I film a video, the planes are just going hard in the paint? I feel like it's far enough away. Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. I really enjoyed this book. This one was on my pile of shame for quite some time, but once I got back into the story and really got immersed in the writing and the character work, I ended up really enjoying this one. I really enjoyed the audiobook of this one especially. This isn't a full cast or anything, but I do feel like Brandon Sanderson's action scenes really thrived in an audiobook setting. I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was really well told. I also feel like the emotions that Samantha has during her journey from point A to point B was very well narrated from the narrator themselves, and I thought that it was really well done. If you don't know what this one is about, this follows Spencer, whose father was a pilot when she was quite young, and he was well known for being a deserter. He fled in the middle of battle, never to be seen again. He actually died during that battle, and Spencer has always wanted to be a pilot, but because her father was a deserter, she kind of got labeled the child of a deserter, and so she really had to fight to get into pilot school, but when she got in, she's fighting to stay, and it's her journey through that, proving that she's worth it, and legacies don't always mean that you follow in the same path as your parents, and I really enjoyed it. And like I said, I think that the emotions and the momentous occasions that happened in this book were narrated so well that it made the experience of listening and reading this book even more momentous, and I just highly recommend this one. This is my first Sanderson that I have read in full, and I really enjoyed it, so highly recommend if you're looking for more YA sci-fi by Sanderson. Up next, we're going to talk about Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. I freaking loved this book and the audiobook. I'm honestly going to say that I thought that I was going to enjoy this book exponentially more, even though I just said I really enjoyed it. I did, but I didn't give it a full 5 stars, and that's just because the beginning of the book didn't necessarily work for me, but everything else from there on out was absolutely amazing. I listened to most of this on audiobook rather than reading the physical book because I was reading this on a commute to work, and I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was very well done. The audiobook has the accent that is very culturally appropriate for the characters of this book. They are Mexican, Latin American individuals, and the narrator also had the same accent, which really brought a extreme vibrancy and authenticity to this narration that made the book feel so real and tangible, which I really loved. But also, between the two characters, I felt like the narration style for every main character that was in this book was so distinct and so well done that you knew exactly who you were listening to, exactly whose emotions you were feeling, and every portion of this book was so well done and narrated to a T that made me enjoy the story even more. There are definitely some audiobooks that I have listened to that have hindered my experience, but this one definitely enhanced it. I highly recommend it. If you don't know what this is about, this one follows Yadriel, who is a trans brujo, and he's really trying to prove to his family that he can be a brujo. So after his cousin passes away so suddenly, he decides to take it upon himself to resurrect his spirit and help him pass over into the afterlife. However, when he does that, he accidentally summons the wrong spirit, and that spirit happens to be the resident bad boy in town named Julian, and yeah, they create a relationship, and it's very cute. Again, the audiobook was fantastically well done. Highly recommend this one if you're looking for a good audiobook. Up next, I feel like this is in every single person's audiobook recommendations, either this or Daisy Jones and the Six, and that is of course The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I would also recommend the audiobook for Malibu Rising. I believe that the narrator that did Malibu Rising also did Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and the reason why I'm recommending this particular audiobook is because of the audiobook narrator, and that is because this audiobook narrator pulled the story together so well, and the nature of this book is it's somebody telling their story to somebody else. And so you really get that experience through the audiobook, and I feel like the person that they chose to narrate Evelyn Hugo was just spot on. It was everything that you could have asked for and more when it came to an audiobook narration. I think that it was literally one of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to. And I believe in my last audiobook recommendation, I also recommended Daisy Jones and the Six, which of course is a full cast audiobook. And it was just so well done. I loved every second of this audiobook. I listened again to this one mostly on audio, and it was so engaging, so consuming. It pulled you right in, sucked you right into the story, and I really think that if you were going to read this book, I highly recommend the audiobook. I think I even recommend it over the physical book for this one. It just enhances the story so much that I think that you should listen to this one on audiobook if you get the chance. If you don't know what this is about, this follows a journalist who is getting a tell-all from this very well-known starlet named Evelyn Hugo, and she's telling her story to only one journalist, and if she doesn't tell it to that person, the deal's off the table. And so you kind of are trying to figure out Evelyn's life and her 7 husbands that she's very famously known for, as well as trying to figure out why this one journalist is so important and integral to the story. It was very well done. I will say this is also LGBTQIA+, so if you're looking for a good book with that representation, I highly recommend it. So well done. Up next, we have 2 back-to-back thrillers. The first one being She's Too Pretty to Burn by Wendy Hurd. This is a Picture of Dorian Gray retelling, but it's also a thriller/mystery. And I think the audiobook of this was the reason why I enjoyed this book as much as I did, because thrillers aren't usually something that A, I overly enjoy, or B, usually keep on my shelves, but I really enjoyed my reading experience of this, specifically the listening experience of this, because I think, again, this one I listened primarily through audiobook, through a commute, and then I picked up the physical book a little bit as well. But this one follows Mick and Veronica. I'm pretty sure I got that right. I'm gonna be And wow, Veronica and Mick. Wow. I'm giving myself a pat on the back. I can't believe I remember that. But it's basically Mick is this very shy girl whose her mother is really trying to get her into photography, and Mick has this really weird fear of being photographed. But then when she meets Veronica at a party, who is also a photographer, she has her picture taken, and they kind of fall into this whirlwind romance. But the picture of Mick kind of goes viral, and it's kind of following that, but you also have this really interesting thrillery plotline on the side that just made it feel so real and vibrant. And I think the audiobook narration of this really pulled out that ominous feeling that the book is supposed to give off, and I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was really well done. I think the audiobook narrator was picked perfectly for this. This is a YA thriller. I don't read a ton of those, but I would recommend it if you're looking for a good one. Along the same lines of books that I feel like are always recommended for audiobook listening, and that is Sadie by Courtney Summers. This is a very interesting thriller / mystery about a girl named Sadie who goes missing after the death of her sister, the murder of her sister. She goes missing, and you're following her timeline, but you're also following a podcast who is narrating the story as they are trying to track down Sadie and follow her footsteps up into her disappearance. And you're getting these very interesting excerpts from the actual podcast that just make the beauty of the story so much more real and tangible. And I think the beauty of this is the podcast element. If it wasn't for the podcast element, I don't think that a lot of people would recommend this audiobook, but I do think the podcast element made it such a level up, because it does really feel like you are listening to a podcast, which is amazing. How many times am I going to say podcast in this section? I do think that it was really well done. I will say that I didn't absolutely love this book. I gave it a 4.5 stars. I think that it was really well done. I think that the ending is very polarizing, so beware of that. This also has triggers for sexual assault, so beware of that. But it is really well done, and I do think that the audiobook narration for this is stellar. Okay, the next book that we're going to talk about is a fantasy book, and for me, fantasies are one of those audiobook experiences that really gets heightened for me. I find that I struggle with world building and complexity and density of fantasies, especially adult fantasies, so I love listening to an audiobook and following along with a physical book when it comes to fantasies. I know that everyone likes to listen to fantasies on audio, but I feel like when you're reading along with the physical book, it really does enhance your experience and allows you to kind of step back and actually really take in the worldly experience of a fantasy without having to think about it too hard. But the one that I'm going to talk about today is a YA fantasy, and this one is Furyborn by Claire Legrand. I feel like the reason why I enjoyed this audiobook the most was because you are dealing with two timelines, and I felt like I did try to read this one physically, by the way, and I felt like when I was reading it, I had a hard time differentiating the past timeline with the present timeline. And I felt like the audiobook really did help me to make that distinction when I was listening to it and reading alongside the audiobook. It really did help in that aspect. I also really liked the way that this book was told. I think that the dual timelines was done really well. I'm not going to be able to explain the synopsis of this. It's been quite a long time since I picked up the first book, but I did really enjoy it. If you are looking for a fun, interesting YA fantasy, I do recommend this one. But I will say the one thing that annoys me about these books, and this is very superficial, but I have to point it out, the first book has deckled edges and the second book does not. Can we just talk about it? Thanks. Up next is another book that is kind of a repeat from the last recommendation of audiobooks that I did, and that is because I recommended the other two books in this series, and I felt like I just wouldn't be me if I didn't recommend this, and that is Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the last and final book in the Brown Sister series, and I loved these books, but my experience was extremely more impressive when the audiobook was added into this. I love these audiobooks so much. It just reminds me of being told a story by an elderly English woman, and when I say that like that, it doesn't sound very appealing, especially because these are adult romances with a little bit of smut, but for some reason it appeals to me. It works. I don't know why it works, but it's so good. The humor in here is done so well, and I feel like when it comes to humor in audiobooks, it has to be hit right, and I feel like the audiobook narrator for these books really did hit that just right, and it's just so good. I love the audiobook so much. When I reread these, I will definitely be sticking on the audiobook route. If you don't know what this series is about, or this book in particular, the Brown Sister series follows 3 Brown sisters and their subsequent love stories with their men of choice. The last book in the series, though, follows Eve, the youngest sister, and she is kind of on the outs with her parents after they kind of cut her off with their trust fund, and she decides, you know what, peace out, I'm gonna go find myself a job, I'm gonna be an adult. And she goes to this bed and breakfast and decides that I'm gonna interview. But the person that is interviewing her, his name is Jacob, and he really does not like her. And on her way out of that interview, she accidentally hits Jacob with her car, and she ends up staying at the little bed and breakfast to look after it while Jacob is recovering. And it's their romance. It's very, very cute. Loved it so much. Again, there's some steamy scenes in here. There's a scene with a vibrator that I really enjoyed. Thank you very much. Highly recommend this, and highly recommend the audiobook. We're getting to the end here. We only have 3 more to go. The next one that I'm going to recommend is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This audiobook was impeccably well made. If you don't know or haven't heard anything about the story, what it's described to me was a middle grade, but for adults, and a warm hug. And that's exactly what the audiobook felt like. It felt like home. It felt very, just homely and cozy and just very cute, and I loved the audiobook experience of this. I liked the voices that the audiobook narrator did for some of the characters. Like Chauncey was so well done. It was so perfect for the character, and I felt like the audiobook narrator went above and beyond, making each individual character their own and giving each character their own personality that was meant for them in this book. And I feel like when audiobook narrators do that and take that extra step and do go above and beyond, it really does make a difference, and I feel like that is definitely the case for The House in the Cerulean Sea. This is a fantastic book about I'm gonna forget his name, a caseworker named Linus Baker, who is a caseworker in the department in charge of magical youth, and he is told to go on this very secret project to go check out this house in the Cerulean Sea, where it houses some kids in a foster care type situation, and making sure that this is a safe environment for them, but also that the kids are safe for the rest of humanity. It was a very sweet found family type of fantasy, and I really, really loved it. If you haven't read this yet, I highly, highly recommend you pick it up. I'm going to recommend another nonfiction, and that is The Magnolia Story by Chip and Joanna Gaines. I loved this short little memoir story of their life, and the reason why I'm recommending the audiobook, not only because of the fact that it's an autobiography and it's told by the authors, but both Chip and Joanna do narrate this audiobook, and the way that they play off of each other and their vibes and their humor, it worked in this book so well. I own a physical copy just because I got it secondhand, but if that wasn't the case, I would have only just owned the audiobook, because the audiobook of this is just so well done. The exact feelings and humor and heart and emotions that they went through when telling the story was so well done. Obviously, it's their own life story. They're telling it the way that they want it to be told. And it was just a beautiful story. The story made me cry so many times. I think that if you're going to read this book, you should definitely listen to the audiobook. It is so worth it. I'm running out of space to put these books. Good thing this is the last one. The last one that I have here is Legend Born by Tracy Dion, another YA fantasy that I really enjoyed the audiobook for. Now, the reason why I enjoyed the audiobook of this is the accents that were in here, so well done. The fantasy plot lines that were told and put together in this were very well portrayed in regards to the audiobook. And I felt like this main character, Bree, has a lot of... I am remembering names really well today. This main character, Bree, has a lot of emotions and a lot that she's going through. Her mother has just passed away recently, and she's in a new environment with a whole bunch of new people, and the emotions that she is feeling are portrayed so well in this audiobook that just made it feel real. That's the thing about audiobooks. I want them to feel real when I'm listening to them, and this one definitely executes that standpoint very well. This is an Arthurian retelling of King Arthur and the Round Table, set in an interesting fantasy landscape. It is an urban fantasy, and there is some secret societies. There is some talk about racism, as well as there's some really awesome LGBTQI plus representation in here. I loved the romance going on in here, but I feel like the angst and the danger of a lot of the situations that Bree got into were very well portrayed by the narrator of this audiobook, and for that I have to give it mad props. Highly recommend reading this book in general. It's a fantastic YA fantasy, but also highly recommend the audiobook if you want to go that route. Okay, that was the last and final audiobook recommendation that I have today. I hope that this helped you in any way if you're looking for some more audiobook recommendations, or if you're just starting out listening to audiobooks and didn't know where to start. I hope that you enjoyed this video and got something out of it. Let me know down below if you were an audiobook listener, and if so, what are your favorite audiobooks that you have ever listened to? If you would like some more recommendations, I will of course leave my past recommendations video in the cards and in the description box below. Probably should have mentioned that at the beginning of this video, but you win some, you lose some, it's okay. But yeah, let me know know what audiobooks that you would recommend if you are a huge audiobook reader as well. And then, of course, if you made it to the end of this video, leave a headphones emoji just to let me know that you made it to the end if you don't know anything else to comment. But that is the end of this video. I really, really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to give it a big O thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe before you leave. And of course, leave any comments, questions, and suggestions in the comment section below. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.
Baby, turn it down like a sweet and ready. Keep it nice and steady. Know that you